Alright peeps, so today I'm going to be going over making an ocarina, or in other words a clay whistle. There's, as you can see, a lot of different forms that you can choose in terms of generally how you want your whistle to look. This is a little bit different. This is more of a flute style. Instead of having a channel that the air flows through, it takes a little bit more experience to get it to make it sound properly. It's a lot like blowing into the top of a Coke bottle. Makes very similar reaction. What I'm mostly going to be going over is how to do something more like this. This was one of the first ones I made. It's got a pretty interesting carving and paint job on it. These things typically sound really good. This one sounds great. It's really low resonance. This is another one that I wasn't impressed with how it came out in terms of what I did with the carvings. It was kind of rushed, and I'm not satisfied with it. It's stoneware now, and it was fired at cone 10, so I can't really do anything else with it. I can paint it and put it in a bisque, and I would be able to get some interesting effects with the glaze, but other than that, it's not gonna get much farther than this. But it did end up turning out that it sounds good. Play this for you. Yeah, it sounds okay. If you put too many holes in it, the notes kind of get drowned out after about the 4th or 5th hole, depending on how big the chamber is, or how well you did your opening. I'm experimenting with different size openings to see if I can get lower, higher pitches, and it kind of varies, to be honest. There's so many variables when it comes to making these things. The thickness of the wall, what kind of clay, whether or not you're firing to cone 10, whether or not you're firing to just a bisque. Like this one, for instance, is just a bisque in my own kiln. These 3 were fired at school. Turned out okay. It's a really big one in terms of how big the chamber is, and the music box is a little larger than I would like it to be. It was just an experiment, to be honest, to see if I could fire anything in my original kiln design, and it worked out pretty well. This one is more of a decorative piece. Doesn't sound as great, but it looks pretty cool. That's pretty much it. So, getting to it, there is going to be a couple things you're going to need. First of all, you're going to need something to rough up the surface. Whenever you stick clay together, you have to scratch it and get it gritty, and then wet it with some kind of slip or water. If you have some clay, you can just put some in a Tupperware container and put some water in it and mix it around a bit. You're going to need a rib for smoothing out the outside. You're going to need something to poke the holes. I will occasionally use a very fine cutting tool. I can't find it right now. Oh, there it is. Very fine cutting tool to cut out the circle for the music box. Also, you're going to need some clay. Now, you're going to want to start off by cutting a slab directly off of a big block that you usually have of clay, but since this is the last remnants, there's a lot of little bits that you have to mush together. So what you're going to want to do is knead it together, and this can take a little bit of practice. It seems very simple, but you'll notice when you start to fire your stuff that when you don't knead it enough and you don't get the clumps mashed together enough, your pieces will start to crack and break when you fire them. I have a lot of pieces that I've done in my own kiln that just crack, and I know it's not because of my firing, because of how it cracks right along a seam, and you can really see it, and you know that it's just something that you did when you put the clay together and put pieces together improperly. So it's something to watch out for. So now that we have a good thorough mashing of the clay, remember not to fold it, because then you get air pockets. So now what we're gonna do is take this ball and we're gonna grip it in the middle and just split it in half. So you're gonna have two fairly even sides, and you're gonna take one, mash it up, put it back in the bag so it doesn't dry out. And we're gonna take this guy, we're gonna smooth it out. Make this as ball-like as we can, because we're gonna make a pinch pot. And this is pretty much how I started making these whistles, is I taking two pinch pots and mashing them together. And then you get a hollow center for your whistle. So this is as good a ball as you really need. Doesn't need to be perfect. You'll shape it out when you pinch out the pot. So what you're gonna do is take your thumb and just start pinching right in the center. You gotta make sure that you pinch evenly all the way around, or else you're gonna have thin spots on one spot, and that can cause your piece to be fragile, and you'll bump it and it'll dent and no one's happy. So make sure you get this nice and even. The thinner your piece is, the more likely that it's not going to explode in the kiln. So you really want to make these walls as thin as you feel comfortable. So take all that and you just spin it. So this one looks like it's going to be pretty big. I probably used too much clay for the size whistle I was intending to make. So there you have that. Now I'm going to get to the other one, and I'll speed that up a bit so you don't have to watch all that. Alright, so now that we have our two halves, what we can do is kind of size them up and make sure that they're going to fit together. So it looks like I used a little bit more clay on one than I did the other, but I'm not going to worry about it because it doesn't really matter how big one side is versus the other. As you can see, this side's a little smaller, but we won't even notice. So what we're going to do is get our scraping tool, take that and make some nice fat gouges right along the edge. This is so that it bonds together and it's just not smooth clay against smooth clay. Because we're going to take that and paint slip over it. Alright, so we're going to take our slip, give that a good mix so we get enough of that clay in there, and we're just going to be fairly liberal with it, not really worried about it. Get both sides. I'm going to take these and we gotta press them together. Now this can be kind of difficult because you'll end up pressing too hard in some places and smash the other side, and you don't want this to cave in because you need that hollow space in the middle. So I wedge my fingers together and kind of bring it together as close as I can without deforming it. Kind of have a little like oblong shape here. Alright. So this looks like I'm just about good. So while this is still wet, what I usually do is take another snake of clay and go around the outside just for added support. Alright, so I'm making my snake. This, of all things, doesn't need to be perfectly even. Just the more lumpy it is, the more you gotta smooth it out in certain areas. Take this guy, and I'm just gonna kind of press and push to get a little bit of extra length out of it. So I probably won't even need to use this whole thing. Once you have that all the way across, what you're going to do is just smear it. This is going to make sure that the snake that you just put on bonds with both halves of the sphere or oblong shape. So just continue smashing around the outside and make sure that there's no creasing, because that will cause cracking during the firing. And you will continue to do the same thing on the other side. So if your clay is too wet from joining them together, you may want to wait before you do this step. A lot of times the clay can be difficult to work with if it's too wet, and when you smear it, it'll break off in large chunks. So you can let it sit for about 10 minutes after you stick them together, and then you can start on that process. So this is your ball. This is what the base of your whistle will be. If you just kind of work it around, you can make it more spherical if you like. There's a lot of shapes that you can make. It doesn't really matter what shape it is, as long as it has some curved insides. Usually it will make some kind of sound. So there you got